Hey there, folks. I am Tread, and welcome to the first video of this web development basics tutorial series. I am someone who's really passionate about development and computer science as a whole. The majority of my experience is in web and game development, so I figured I'd use both of those areas to share that passion and knowledge with anyone interested in learning. So in this tutorial, I want to start by covering the basics of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which are the fundamental languages for web development. Then I'll bring you along as I code a simple guess the number game using what we've just learned. So with that said, before we get to writing our code, we need something to write it in. And probably no surprise to you, we're not going to be using Notepad or Microsoft Word. We'll instead be using an IDE, or an integrated development environment. It's basically a text editor built specifically for coding with some extra features to help you write, test, and debug your code more efficiently. The one I'll be using is called Visual Studio Code, or VS Code for short. VS Code is a free and pretty beginner-friendly IDE developed by Microsoft. You can download it at code.visualstudio.com. I'll put a link in the description as well. VS Code also allows you to install various extensions, which are optional extra tools made by various developers. And I'll be using this one here called Live Server, created by the developer Ritwik Day. This will allow us to see the changes to our code in real time without having to close and reopen the file. All right, so once you have VS Code downloaded and opened up, we can get started with the basics of HTML. So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. We can think of HTML like the skeleton or backbone of the web page. It defines the structure, the layout, and the base content that we see on the page. CSS is more of the styling, how things look. It's like the clothing or hair. And JavaScript is kind of like the muscle. It defines how things move, how things function, how we can interact with them. However, we can't use any CSS or JavaScript, at least in terms of web development, without HTML. The CSS needs HTML to style, and the JavaScript needs HTML to interact with. So with VS Code open, the first thing we're going to do is create a new file called basics.html. That HTML file extension tells our computer that this is an HTML file, and it also tells VS Code how to properly highlight the code that we're going to write. So HTML consists almost entirely of elements, and these elements all, for the most part, follow the same basic syntax. We're going to have the open and closing tags and then the content in between. That looks a little bit something like this. So we have our open tag here with this open chevron, the name of our element, which for this example, I just used tag, and then a closing chevron. And then we have on the right side here, the closing tag, which looks almost exactly the same as the opening tag, but we have this backslash before the element name. And then everything in between is the content. We can have plain text as the content, just like we have here, or you can have other elements as the content. In fact, pretty much everything we write in our code is going to be inside of an HTML element. There is only going to be one thing outside of this HTML element, and that's the doc type declaration, and I'll get to that in a second. But everything else, everything that we're actually going to put on our web page is going to be inside this HTML element. And inside of here, I'm going to add two more. The head, and then underneath the head, I'm going to put the body. And this head element is where we're going to put all of the metadata for our web page, all of the extra information that doesn't need to be displayed on the page, but the browser needs to know. And then everything that does display on the page will be inside the body element. So I can actually type content here. And if we save the file, we right click, go to open with live server. That's from the live server extension we downloaded earlier. It opens up the web page in my default browser, and we can see the word content up here in the upper left-hand corner. Now, I'm actually going to get rid of all this. I'm going to show you a little shortcut that comes baked into VS Code for HTML documents. I'm going to type an exclamation point and then press enter. You can see VS Code kind of spits out this boilerplate. So let's read through this and see what we have. Up here on line 1, we have this element, so to speak, that says doc type and then HTML. So this is our doc type declaration that I was talking about earlier. Every HTML file needs to start with the doc type declaration. This tells the browser that everything below this line is HTML code for it to parse. Then below that, we have our opening HTML tag. And inside of here, we see this lang equals en. So this is called an element attribute. Attributes are extra information we can give to specific elements that doesn't necessarily need to be in the content. In this case, we are setting the lang or language attribute to the value of en, which is short for English. And when the browser reads this attribute on the HTML element, it knows that the language of the web page is going to be English. And this is helpful for automatic translations. So if somebody who does not speak English wants to read the web page, the browser knows what language to translate it from. And then we have our opening head tag. And inside of our head element, we have these two meta elements and then a title element. So the two meta elements are providing some extra metadata for the browser in regards to our web page. This first one has the attribute charset equals UTF-8. That is the character set that we're using. UTF-8 is the most common. Using anything other than UTF-8 is very rare, so having this as your default is pretty safe. And then in the one below it, we have this name equals viewport attribute. That is just used to make sure that the web page displays properly on whatever device you're viewing it on, such as your phone or your desktop. And then we have the content attribute that has some more information in there. We have width equals device width. So that is going to set the default width of our web page to whatever the width of the device viewing it is. And then we have initial scale equals 1.0. That's just to say that the initial zoom should be 1 or 100%. We don't need to make it any bigger or smaller by default. And then finally, we have the title element, which right now just says document. And this is going to define what we see in our browser tab. So if we go back to our web page, we can now see in the browser tab up in the upper left, it says document. I'm going to go ahead and change this to HTML basics. And when I save, we go back to the browser, it now says HTML basics. And then finally, we have an empty body element and the closing tag for our HTML. So let's get to actually putting something on the page. So the first elements I'm going to show you are some headings. There are 6 of them in total, and they are designated using the H1 through H6 tags. H1 is going to be our biggest one. This is going to be our main heading. And what that looks like is this big bold text up here at the top that says main heading. And below that, I will add an H2, and this is going to be our subheading. And on the web page, we can see that our subheading is a little bit smaller than the main heading. They're still both bold because they're supposed to be titles, headers, but our subheading is a little bit smaller. And they go down H2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6, each one getting a little bit smaller, a little bit less important, if you will. Okay, so we have titles, but what about just regular text? I don't want it to be a title. I just want the user to read something on the web page. And for that, we can use the paragraph element. The paragraph element just uses a P for its tag name. And then in here, we can say this is a paragraph. Spelled that wrong. We'll use this for blocks of text. And on our web page, this looks like just a regular block of text. There's also a couple of text elements that we can use for some basic styling. So I'm going to add a new paragraph tag, and inside of here, I'm going to use the strong element. Strong element is used for important text. If we take a look at that, it's the same type of text as the line above it, but it's in bold. Now we do also have the bold element, which is just a B. And when we take a look at that, it looks exactly the same as the important text. They're just 2 different elements that kind of do the same thing visually. In the background, they kind of have a little bit of separate meanings, but if your goal is just to put bold text on the page, either one of these will work. Now I'm going to add a line break element with this BR, and this is a special element. It's called a void element. and it doesn't need a closing tag, and it doesn't have to have any content. The only purpose for the line break is to break the line. So now our bold text and important text is on two different lines. Now in the same style of bold, we also have emphasized text, which is going to be visually the same as italicized text. And so on the web page, we have our nice slanted italicized text. And the same as bold and strong, these two are visually the same. However, in the background, for things like screen readers, for folks who are a bit more visually impaired, it has a bit of a different meaning. A screen reader is going to read the emphasis element and the strong element text differently than it would the regular text, whereas if it comes across the italics or bold elements, it's going to read that the same as the rest of the text. Do screen readers care about B or I tags? Okay, fact checked. Now, as an added way to break up our page, I'm going to put an H3 element up here, paragraphs, and then down here, add another H3 element for the next topic, which is numbered/ordered lists. So to make an ordered list, the first thing we'll need is an OL tag. And then inside of here, we're going to have 4 different list items using the LI tags. And we'll just copy this and paste it 3 more times. And let's add our to-do list for the day. So we have wake up, brush your teeth, quit your job, and then finally go back to bed. And what this looks like on our web page is an ordered list, 1, 2, 3, and 4. We didn't have to add those numbers in there on our own. It was done automatically by the OL and LI elements we added here. And then similarly to numbered and ordered lists, we also have bulleted/unordered lists. And this is going to look much the same, but instead we're going to use the UL or unordered list tag. And we'll add 3 different list items. We'll make a little grocery list for the day, where we can have bread, milk, and some eggs. And on our web page, shows up as a bulleted list. And we can even nest these one level further. So under milk, let's say we want to get 2 different types of milks. So I'll put another unordered list element. I'm going to indent that one more. Then we'll have 2 more list items, and we'll say whole milk and almond. And we can see on the web page, the sublist is indented one level further from the main list, and it uses these clear white bullets as opposed to the darker filled in ones. All right, so we have our text and we have our list, but what about something a little bit more interactable? Let's do links. So a link tag is not what we're going to use here. Links are actually going to be made with the anchor tag. So I'm going to add a paragraph element, and then let's put HTML documentation link. And then after that, I'll add our anchor tag, and we'll enter the text as MDN Web Docs, or MDN, not NDM. And then on our web page, well, I click on it and nothing happens. It just kind of looks like plain text. Well, we've told the link what to say, but we haven't told the link where to go. And to do that, we are going to add a couple of attributes to our opening anchor tag. The first one is going to be the href. This is going to be the destination of the link itself. So we'll put https://developer.mozilla.org. And now go back to the web page and we click MDN Web Docs, and it takes us to the MDN documentation for HTML. Now, you may have noticed when we clicked on it, it takes us to developers.mozilla.org, but it does so in the same tab. So we have completely lost our web page. And personally, I hate that behavior, but we can avoid it using a different attribute called target. And in target, we're going to use this one right at the top that VS Code is suggesting to us, _blank. And target with the value of underscore blank means that the link will now open in a new tab instead of the same tab. I use the target attribute set to underscore blank for pretty much every link that I add to my websites. So our website is looking pretty bland at the moment. Let's add a little bit of color with an image. And we can do that using the img element. And this is another one of those void elements. So we can actually type it out like this, and it's just one tag that closes itself. However, this alone is, of course, not going to put any image on the web page. Similar to the link, we have to tell it where to find the image to put on the screen. And we will do that with our src, or source attribute. And then I'm also going to add this alt attribute. This alt attribute is very important because if your image fails to load, whatever value is set to this alt attribute is going to be what's displayed instead. And it's also important for screen readers, as that's what it's going to read to someone who's visually impaired and can't actually see the image. So I'm going to be adding the HTML5 logo image here. So we'll put that in the alt tag. And since we actually don't have a working source at the moment, we'll see that our alt text appears on the web page right under image. So this is the Wikipedia page on HTML5, and it has the logo in this right-hand column here. So I'm going to right-click that and go to copy image link. And then back in our code, I'm going to paste that image link in our source attribute. And now when we press save, we now see the HTML5 logo on our web page. Helps to add a little bit of color to the page. All right. And the last topic that I want to cover can be a little bit more in depth, and that is going to be forms. A form is something that we can use to ask the user for some data, and then when they click a submit button, that data can be sent somewhere else, like an external API. So the first thing we're going to need is, of course, a form element. And then in here, we're going to add an input element. Just like the line break or the image element, the input element is a void element, and so we do not need a closing tag, and we can just close it out right here in the opening tag, and we're just going to add a couple different attributes. The first of which will be type. We're going to set this to the value of text. And now, with this alone on our web page, when we scroll down, we can see there's a little text box at the bottom, and I can click inside of it, and I can start typing, and it responds to my keyboard inputs. Then next, we're going to add a placeholder attribute, and we'll just set this to first name. So now our text box says first name in this gray text in the background of the text box, and it's overwritten when I start typing something into it. And then we're going to add two more. First one will be ID, and we're going to set this to the value of first underscore name, and then a name attribute, which we will also set to first underscore name. So the name attribute is what the form is going to use to identify the data that's in this specific input element. And then the ID attribute is what CSS and JavaScript can use to specifically identify this input element. However, the ID will also be used for our label element, which we'll add, and we'll give it the content of just first name and a little colon. And then in our opening tag for the label, we'll use the for attribute and set this to first name. Whoops. And so the for attribute is going to look for whatever element has the ID of first name, which in this case is the input right below it. Then I'm going to add a line break right between them. And now we can see that our label appears right here just above the text box itself. The for attribute for the label element doesn't really do a whole lot in terms of what you see on the web page, but like a lot of other things we've gone over, that is a bit more for accessibility and screen readers to know which input is associated with what label. So let's expand upon our form a little bit, and we'll add another input and label element. And for this one, we're going to say label for equals email, and you guessed it, email. Our line break, and then the inputs. And then for this one, we will use the type equals email, placeholder equals email, ID equals email, and name equals email. You'll never guess what this input is for. And on the web page, there's another label and another text box. But in this case, because the type of this input is email, we could set different validation to the text that the user puts into that text box when they submit the form to double check that it is actually a properly formatted email and contains an @ symbol and a domain name. All right. And then one more, add a couple more line breaks. And then this time, we're going to add a little checkbox. So we'll add our label. And in this one, we'll say subscribe to Tread. And we'll give it the for attribute of sub. Add a line break. And then our input. And in this case, the type will be checkbox. And then, of course, we don't need a placeholder for a checkbox, but we can still add our ID of sub and the name sub. Take a look at what that looks like. And it looks like a text box, not a checkbox. Let's see. Oh, I misspelled type here. But now, yep, now it is a checkbox. I can click it and the blue check mark shows up and I can unselect it. But I think we'll go ahead and keep this one clicked. Cool. And then finally, now that we have all the information we need from the user, we need a way for them to send it. And we'll do that with a button. Add our line breaks, and then we'll add a button. Give it the text of submit, and then let's also give this the type of submit. Using the type attribute in the button element and setting it to the value of submit tells the parent form element that this is the button that when clicked should submit the form. If we take a look, scroll down, we have our submit button. And if I click it, all it does is refresh the page, which is the default behavior of a submit button. But let's go ahead and add a little bit of JavaScript to make it do something else for now. So in our form element, I'm going to add an onSubmit attribute. And in here, we're going to add a little sneak peek into JavaScript. The first thing we're going to say is event.preventDefault. And so what this is going to do is prevent it from the default submission behavior, which is to refresh the page. We don't want the user to refresh the page. We want them to stay right where they are. And then we're going to use the alert function. And in here, put form submitted for a space and a plus sign. And then we're going to say this.firstName.value. And so what this is going to do is it's going to show a little pop-up message that will say form submitted for, and then it's going to take the value from whatever element has the name of first name and display it. So in action, if I type Tread, I click subscribe to Tread and press submit, pop-up says form submitted for Tread. Now, you definitely don't need to fully understand what this JavaScript was doing or how it works or anything like that. We're going to cover that in some later episodes. I just wanted to add this in now so that our form does a little bit something else other than just refresh the page. All right, and with that, that is everything that I want to show you for this Basics of HTML tutorial video. I am going to be posting the code from this episode and every episode following on a public GitHub repository. So if you want to double check your work or just pull the code as I wrote it, then be sure to check out the description for a link to the GitHub repository. In the next episode, we are going to get started with the basics of CSS, and we're going to start adding some more style and color to our web page and make it a little bit less boring. But as for now, that is all that I have for you. I really appreciate you checking out this video, and I'll see you in the next one.